The word Chicano just means, somebody that is involved with their culture. People used to associate it with gang banging and a lot of bad things back in the days, but when you grow up in that culture, you don't see it that way because you know about the love and the dedication that these people have for their families and the cars and what we do with our artwork and all the different facets of the culture that we enjoy.
I grew up in it, I live it. My dad was Chicano through and through, and we lived that life every day. Whether it was family tradition or incorporating the lowrider lifestyle was what we lived by. Growing up in the 70s, he used to always talk about Chicano this, and they had their ways of doing things, and that was their way of explaining how they live their life. We are Chicano, we are Mexican Americans, and this is what we see ourselves as.
My neighbor across the street, he had a lowrider, and my other friend down the street, he had a lowrider, and the deals, and he had a lowrider, and then this guy had a lowrider. You bonded with certain people in the Chicano hood element, but I was always, in the art community. I had a big wall on the side of my house right next door in the front yard that my dad let me paint, so I was always out there painting, in the hip hop scene, the early 80s, and it was a positive thing for me after I grew up and understood what it was all about. So I re-embraced the culture. I got back into it and I started seeing images and in my head, oh, I gotta start painting that stuff and, really giving back to the culture that way. So it works out for me. I really enjoy being a part of the culture and capturing the moments of what I see, how I see it, and put it in my art and, just the cruising culture in general.
I've always been a fan of lowriding and going to all the cruises. I can't remember not being around it. I think when I was little and I would see my uncle and my brother had a car show car. Seeing him enter all the shows and seeing my uncle with his car. I was young at the time, and I obviously I couldn't afford it, but when I got older, my first car was a Cutlass. I actually bought it off my uncle. My grandfather even, he had an old car that he would tell us how he would lower it when he was younger and what he would do to it to modify it. He said it wasn't the best ride, but it looked nice, but he would always explain it to us. That was just the way that he did things back then, they liked the style, and you could see a car and be oh, that's a lowrider, but there's so many different types. Just like people, there's so many different types of people, but you can tell it's a person.
A lot of the times it's a family heirloom. It's been handed down from the grandpa to the son to the grandson to the great-grandson. That carries on to the communities and how we treat each other with the respect and the gratitude that we have. It's a lot's changed. At the same time, in the community, everybody appreciates how hard they work together in building their cars.
My dad had a car, 1976 Impala, glass house, and it was his first car, and it was also my first car. And he gave it to me when I was 13 years old. I couldn't even drive, but he gave it to me anyway. He's like, it's broken, but you'll fix it, and it's yours. Cruising down Central in the early 90s with my dad and my mom, and going to my tia's house because she actually lived on Central, so we would have to go down Central to get to her house. But we would sit with our lawn chairs out there and watch cars turn around and the whole cruising experience. I grew up in South Phoenix, so everything around us and what we were surrounded by was just lowriding. That's all we talked about at school. That's how we all related. What kind of car are you gonna get? Or what kind of car do you have, And at 13, 14 years old, that's all you think about. That's all I think about, besides my son, obviously, but cars is everything to me, and lowriding means everything to me.
You got to give credit to the mechanics, the people who are making this work, the guys who are putting the hydraulics, the Franks, those guys that are out there tearing these cars apart, redoing the suspension to make them perform like they do, and being able still to drive it. That's like an art in itself. You might not be an artist on canvas, but I guarantee you, if you take a look at the technical work, these guys they're putting together masterpieces. It's a big canvas. It's a rolling canvas, 100%.
The translation with art and the lowrider would be, you get to pick however you want it. There's no real rules. You can do whatever you want.
I guess it was the wow factor, people were trying to be different. They were trying to think outside the box other than what they would see on the streets. And they utilized parts and things that nobody would ever think of to create this beautiful machine that I think is the most beautiful custom cars in the world. Because it takes a lot of heart, takes a lot of love to build something like that. And creativity is the ultimate factor. I think that's why I continue doing it, is because just the love of, air flowing through your hair, in the convertible or whatever, I don't have much hair, but being in your car and people, when you're passing by, people are staring and looking and there's thumbs up and that feel of like, man, this feels good. Like I created something that people like, or the car I'm driving is immaculate or beautiful and people just see it. And it kind of gives a sense of love and just a good feeling.
It's always been cool. It's just in a small niche of people, but then when you get it to the place where it's, you know, expanded to car culture. I was at Barrett Jackson. There's Lowrider Barrett Jackson's. It's always about the car. Like, it makes you look good. You pull up to a spot, you hit your switches on somebody, you pull up, you make an entrance. That's how you make an entrance in the car culture. You roll up and let everybody know you're there.
I think it's really cool that now the culture's being recognized. Being here from Phoenix, it's really cool to see like people that I know getting notoriety and like being involved in that whole thing and like embracing it. You never would have thought you would ever see the day of something like that, you know, when I was younger. You know, it was like you see a lowrider and people would just like kind of shy away from it, like, oh man, get away from them, they're probably a gang member, you know. Like now I have people like all sorts like coming up to me and they're like, oh wow, can I look at your car? So it's a whole different thing now.
There was a stigma behind lowriding because back then Impalas and in the 80s, the Regals and the Cutlasses were affordable vehicles and things that people could get for a couple $100s, right? So then they associated those with people like gangsters that bought these cars because they were $100. Now that people are starting to appreciate the vehicle for what it is, instead of the stigma that came from years ago, people are wanting to see these vehicles on the street. They're wanting them to be in their movie. They're wanting them to be in their halftime show. They're wanting them to be in the commercial. But let me say something, Chicano is not a costume. It's a lifestyle. It's not something you can just put on and play. It's something that you have to live every day and you have to embody it, and it starts from generations ago.
It's love, it's respect, you know, it's teamwork, it's camaraderie, you know what I mean, it's passion. There's so many different emotions that get involved when you're dealing with a community of people who just got nothing but love and respect for each other.